Hello, I'm Jessica Echeverria, Senior Editor at Lee & Low Books. Thanks for joining and tuning in to our Tea Time Talk. I'm excited to talk today with author Andrea Loney, whose picture book biography, Take a Picture of Me, James Van Der Zee, was our 2014 New Voices winner. Hi, Andrea.
Hey, Jessica, it's okay. If anybody was in New Jersey,
Yes.
knows me as Andrea, and other people know me as Andrea.
It's so funny. We went over this at least 100 times before this, but yeah, it's so good to talk to you. It's been a while. Like, I looked up and I couldn't believe that this was the 2014 winner. It feels like yesterday.
Time is weird in the picture book world. It goes really slow, then it goes fast, then it goes slow again.
Yes, that's actually some good advice for any authors or, out there that are trying to break into picture books, is that it's a long process sometimes.
Really. We are writing books for children who might not yet have been born.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, so for those that are unfamiliar with this wonderful book, I thought we should share the book with them. And if you could just talk about James Van Der Zee.
All right, so this is Take a Picture of Me, James Van Der Zee. And by the way, the name of the book, I think I had some other big lofty name for this book. And my mom was like, why not just take a picture of me, James Van Der Zee? And I'm like, yeah, so go mom.
Go mom, yes. Oh, and real quick, just to, I forgot to mention that the illustrations are gorgeously done by Keith Mallett. So just everyone will get a chance to see that. But sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, and there's Keith's work. And, oh, if you can go back just one
Oh,
slide.
sure.
Thank you. In the acknowledgements, I list a lot of people, including my amazing editorial fairy godmother, Jessica. And I had some really great critique partners who helped me with this, and also the Los Angeles Public Library. I basically wrote, like, I'd say like 75% of this book just sitting in the library and getting with stacks of books and everything. So they were really useful. And Donna Van Der Zee, his widow, was also really helpful.
So helpful. Yeah, I want to talk about that later too.
Yeah.
Just getting to talk to her and meet her.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Okay, so I'm going to just talk through kind of how the book is set up. So we started with James as a child in Lenox, Massachusetts, and it was like a resort area, a resort town, and he lived really close to his family. Their houses were right next to each other. They had businesses. So, and his parents were the butler and maid of former President Ulysses Grant. So they had a particular type of upbringing. And but really, James was just a kid who loved to draw and draw and draw and draw. So, and I'm sure everybody here knows some kid who loves to draw. And he was really into, he was the oldest brother. Oops, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Very slow. He was the oldest brother of, of a bunch of kids. They're very classically trained in music and art and everything. But, and this is the first slide that I usually talk, when I talk to kids about this, when he's trying to draw his family's faces, it always gets messed up, because we've all had that experience where you try to draw somebody you care about and it doesn't look the way they look to your eyes or how they look in your heart, and then you just get really like, don't even look at this, So that was a big issue for him when he was a kid, but this book is basically how he found a way to deal with it. Yeah. So how he dealt with it is that a guy came with this thing called a camera to their house, and it was the only camera in Lenox. And when James saw the final product, the final picture, and he just said, like, in his notes that I read, he said, I didn't have to do all that scribbling and nibbling and erasing anymore. I could just take a picture and that would be it. And that's when he decided he wanted to have a camera. So he got a camera through winning a contest. Well, I mean, it didn't all work out exactly the way he wanted to, but ultimately he got this camera. And then he was the second person, and he was still like in elementary school. But he got this camera and he ran all around town with his camera. He took pictures of his classmates. He took pictures of the aristocrats who came to visit. He took pictures of everybody. And then he went into the dark room. And remember how he didn't like the scribbling and nibbling with the drawing? He did that in the dark room where he took the pictures and then he made them look even better so that they could really, really show what he saw when he saw these people that he loved so much.
And this was all self-taught too. Like he had some, right. He had some instructions for how to create a dark room.
A tiny instruction booklet.
Right.
He just read that and did all the rest of it on his own.
Incredible.
Okay, and then he moved to Harlem. He actually went down with his dad, I believe, and his brother, to see if he could get a job there. And instead of being in this tiny little town, he's in this huge city with more Black people than he had ever seen in his entire life, because his town was integrated where it was Black families and white families, you know, going to church together, going to school together, all of that. And Harlem was just this huge town with all these talented people, and he was really excited. So he decided he was going to get a job. He got a job in Newark, New Jersey, or Newark if you don't live in New Jersey. Newark, New Jersey. I can't ever say that right. In a portrait studio, and he's going to take pictures of all these fancy, you know, big city people. But his boss said, no, people would not want of their photograph taken by a Black man, and he sent them to the dark room to develop the pictures. And usually when I read this book to kids, that's where it's like, eek! Everybody just gasps, like, oh, what? Wait a minute, he's taking all these pictures and they just said no? And then it's really cool, no matter where I am in the country, when I share this with kids, they all just go, racism.
Yes.
Face. Even though I did not put the word racism in there. But yeah, that's how it feels sometimes, where you are in one environment and everything's cool and everybody's, you know, doing everything together. And then you get to this other environment and then all of a sudden there's this invisible wall that you never even saw before. And now what do you do? And we would normally talk about, me and the kids, okay, so what would you do? If you were in his situation, would you leave? What would you do? And then we talk about what James did. Now, the deal with James's boss is that he was a businessman, so he's cranking out those pictures, and he took the pictures too quickly sometimes, and the customers weren't even ready, so they weren't really all happy with their portraits. And then when his boss went on vacation, he left James in charge of the shop, you know, and said, okay, you can take the pictures, but, you know, take care of my business. And what James did was completely different than what his boss did. So what James did is he talked to the customers. He did this thing where like strangers would show up and he'd be like, hello, friend, how you doing? And people would feel really at ease and comfortable. And he found their real smiles, their natural smiles, not the cheese really fast smiles, but smiles. And he, you know, and he had really good backgrounds and props and everything. And he treated them like family. And then in the dark room, he made everything look even better. And I like this picture as an example.
Yeah.
It's okay. Because in the original, and this is something that actually happened, a woman came in with a screaming baby and the baby would not stop crying during the portrait. And she was worried, oh, I'm going to waste all this money on this portrait and the baby's crying. And James is like, don't even, it's going to be beautiful. You're going to love your portrait. It's going to be great. And what he did is he put musical notes coming out of the baby's mouth so it looked like the baby was singing opera. And of course she loved it. And of course he made the mom look like she hadn't been up all night with a screaming baby.
Right.
That's what he did. I mean, basically he was doing like Photoshop or like Instagram filters before there were computers. And he did it all by hand.
By hand, self-taught, just, yeah. Okay. And then.
So then After his boss came back, people were like, yeah, where's James Van Der Zee? Take a picture of me, James Van Der Zee. So he got to start his own business, and it was right around the time that the Harlem Renaissance was starting. So there was all this brand new music and art and books and glamour and entertainment, and everybody, like Harlem was just like the focal point of so many people. And when I tell this part to kids, they don't always know. So I'm like, politicians like Marcus Garvey and Joe Louis. And yeah, so I'm like, imagine if like Barack Obama and Beyonce, LeBron James decided they were going to come and get their photos taken, because that's what it was like. Like people that big came to get their portraits taken by him.
That's one of the things I love about this book too, is there are so many different components and elements, but is that you highlight this other aspect of the Harlem Renaissance that we don't often hear about. We often hear about the music, we often hear about the writing and literature that was coming out at the time, but here was another art form and someone else who was part of the community, which is so important to highlight why it was called a Renaissance, right? Why there wasn't just one art medium that was happening. It was a lot of different artists coming out.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Artists and businesses and families and organizations and clubs, and just it was just like kind of like a whole like elevation of culture, in the sense that money was coming into the community so that people could really shine in a way that, you know, that could be consumed, let's say, by more of America. Oh, I love this picture, because this picture is the one in the Smithsonian, you know, the African American Museum at the Smithsonian. It's like right at the corner. But yeah, and by the way, these people who we took pictures of, I believe they were accountants in the Great Depression. So, hey. So he photographed rich people, poor people, but mostly the middle class. Again, I was talking about that rising group of African Americans who were, you know, kind of, they came up from where they came up from. They were getting their resources together, and they were really, you know, able to shine. And he took pictures of that, because a lot of times, a lot of the pictures that were being taken or promoted about Black people before them were really kind of like sad, like farm workers, like sharecropper kind of people, or people living in the city in these little tenements and really struggling. They were all pictures of strife and sorrow. And that was an issue for me personally when I was little, because I grew up in a very middle class, you know, quiet little house in the suburbs kind of lifestyle. And I know that as a child, and even as an adult, I've been told like, well, you know, the real Black experience is in the hood, and it's this and it's that. And I'm like, well, not mine. Mine was different, and it was just as real. And the experiences that my cousins had and my friends had and all of that was just as real. And I love the fact that James took pictures of this whole span of experience, because there is not just one story of the Black experience. There's many of us. There's so many different stories. And by telling all the different stories, it humanizes all of us. And I love the fact that he did that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite lines too, and something that just, you know, I want to touch on later on too, but just that idea that, you know, often we see historical images and it's always focused on kind of the struggle and violence, but how, you know, to see the world through his eyes, to see the community that he, you know, lived in and loved, and to see the joy of it, right? What a different image to share with young kids too. Like, this is part of their history as well.
Right.
Like, but yeah, I would love to get back to that too. And just to highlight Keith's gorgeous illustrations here, you know, these are based on real photographs, which we did license for permission for this book from Donna Van Der Zee. But, you know, Keith is just amazing in his art. These sketches came to me, and it's pretty much this. And then he sent it in color, and it's to me, every single time it's like Dorothy opening the door into Oz, where it just everything comes into Technicolor, and I'm just like, this is the most beautiful book, which I do think it is. It is. Yeah, and then he just kind of moving on, because I do want to talk about so many great things about this book that this, for me, you know, for people that are familiar with the story, was something originally this was going to be the ending of the story. And I'm so glad that Andrea and I talked about this and I listened to her, because she said it was really important to show he had a second act. So if you can just talk a little bit about that, because this is something I often share with authors too, is the story of how this came about. That my instinct as an editor was originally to be like, let's keep it short, the pacing is great, let's just end it on a high note. And then you were like, no, I think it's really important for kids to also see that, you know, he had a second act in his life, and that sometimes things don't work out, and that sort of resilience.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that really always inspired me about this specific artist is the fact that he did things when he was so young. He did things for a period of time, and then his life just kind of, you know, things kind of fell apart for a little bit. In his case, it's because people were able to take their own pictures with cameras. And I don't know who's listening to this, but if you're old enough, you might remember going to some place like Sears Portrait Studios to get your picture taken with your family. And people do that less and less and less now because we've all got our own cameras. Well, for him, some of that started a bit, I would say a bit after World War II. And his business kind of started to decrease. And it got to the point where he had to close his studio because there were no more people coming in really to get their pictures taken. And then he was working on people's passport photos. So, I mean, we could have ended the story there. We could have ended the story like on the upswing, like, oh, he got his business and it was really great.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that happened for him is sometime way, way later in his life, someone came from the Metropolitan Museum of Art and they said, hey, we're going to do this retrospective on the history of Harlem. And we looked for pictures, and like almost all the pictures we found were your pictures that people had and, you know, that we found and all that other stuff. And we want to put together a whole thing. And what they ended up doing is blowing his pictures up to life size. So his whole, like, it was basically like walking through, you know, the 40 years of the history of Harlem and walking through all of his pictures and like really bringing all of this to the people who came and maybe would not have seen these pictures before. Because again, if we had stopped the story when, you know, his business started booming and everything like that, let's say before, you know, in between World War I and World War II, we would have missed out on this part where as a senior citizen, he got this whole resurgence in his career. And what we know about him now, I think, came from this happening. If this hadn't happened, I think he might have stayed in obscurity, you know? But because this happened and because technology had marched on and there was a whole big thing and there were books that came out of this, yeah, it made a difference. And the other thing I love about this spread is that the artist, Keith Mallet, was there at the exhibit and he painted himself into the picture.
Yes, I know. Yes, I was going to say this, so I'm glad you did. Yeah, Keith was actually there. And so when I approached him to illustrate this book, he was so excited and was just like, I was there. I know how to do this book.
Yeah, he did such an amazing job on this book. Every time I got any kind of pictures, I was almost always like working at a temp job or something at the time. I would just sit there at my desk and cry, and they'd be like, why is the temp crying again? Like, it's so beautiful, look at this. They're like, great, where's that spreadsheet? I'm like, okay, here's your spreadsheet, but look.
And then this is the final spread, which we also discussed internally about which photos to show. And I'm always so excited that we got to show the Basquiat photo, just to show his span of like that he was, around and doing photography. I forget, was this second resurgence like around, he was 90, 92?
Yeah, this was when he was in his, he was like 90, he had to be between 93 and 95 at
Okay.
this point, because it was after he married Donna.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about what images to show, and to show the little girls dancing and Basquiat, and then we have the back matter, which we had this rare opportunity to actually speak to Donna Van Der Zee, who was James Van Der Zee's widow. And, when I had reached out to her, she was a little, rightfully so, a little suspicious, and was very protective of his work and wanted to know what we were going to do with it. And then once we explained and told her, we think that he should have a biography about him, what an important person to have a picture book about. And then you had a chance to talk to her. So what was that like?
Okay, the first conversation I had with her, she actually got to see a preliminary sketches before I did.
Oh, right.
So
yes.
she was like, and what's this? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't see it. And then she's asking me about the text, and I literally felt like I was defending my dissertation. And it was a very intense conversation.
Mm-hmm.
There were tears, some were her tears, some were my tears. And really what it came down to, because she wanted to know, what do you want to do with my husband? Because she's trying to protect his legacy as best as she can in a digital environment where his pictures are everywhere, and you can't really control that kind of thing with the internet. And I, through my tears, said, this man has done so much and made so much beauty in this world, and nobody's talking about him, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody's sharing his work. And there should definitely be a book about him, and not just a book for adults, but a book for children to be able to see from an early age how this all works. And that was part of, I think, what got her to feel better about my involvement in it. And I would talk to her all the time about little things that happened in the book. She would share information that, isn't in the book. But one of the best things for me about writing this book, aside from winning the Loney Voices Award and being nominated for an NAACP award and all that great stuff, I got to give Donna her husband back in the form of this book. And it was such an amazing thing, because sometimes we would talk on the phone and we would just talk about him, and she missed him. And of course she missed him. He was a great guy. He was a sweetheart.
And just to give some backstory. So part of her kind of suspicion was that he had been taken advantage of. Like, people had used his images before without any compensation, without any, for years. And it was under Donna's guidance that she was able to pull and get all the rights back to his photographs. So yeah, because I had those hard conversations with her too, where it was just like, who are you? And what are you going to do?
Oh, can you go to the picture of Donna, though? She might be in the next one, I think.
She is, yeah.
There's Donna with the cat.
With the cat, which is the same cat. It was her cat. That's the same cat. If people are familiar with the Basquiat photo, that's the same cat that's in that photo. And she was so kind and gracious, and all of these photos are from permission of her. So she, I was able to visit her and go through the archives and pick out which photos, talking with you as well, like which photos do we really want to highlight. And since we're on this page, do you want to talk about why this photo on the left, the Alpha Phi Alpha basketball team, is so important?
Alpha Phi Alpha basketball team is on there because my dad is an Alpha Phi Alpha. So I wanted to make sure that, we could put that in there too. Also, because in the acknowledgements, I thanked my mom and my grandpas and a bunch of people, and I forgot to thank my dad. So because I forgot to thank my dad, I put his fraternity. And hopefully that kind of works out.
Yeah, it does. And then we have an example of his kind of photoshopping here on the right, where on the left you see it's before he retouches the photo, and then on the right you see, so he was doing this way ahead of his time.
Yeah, it really is amazing how, like, because he would look at somebody and he could see somebody's like inner beauty, and then he would take a picture, and the picture shows with the, camera takes what the camera takes, and then he just kind of added the version of the beauty of them that he saw, which I just thought was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my biggest takeaway from talking to Donna Van Der Zee was just how much he loved people. Like, he really enjoyed just sitting and talking and getting to know people. And I think that's shown in his work. Like, his photographs show a lot of joy and a lot of like kind of just like a calm essence, because I think he created that environment for people. And then the other photo I wanted to, oh wait, you wanted to talk about future expectations because, yes.
Yeah, so this picture, the future expectations photo, this is the picture that made me decide that I wanted to know more about James Van Der Zee. I saw this picture when I was about 11 years old at my grandparents' house. I believe it was a magazine like Ebony Jet or something along the lines of that. And I saw the picture of the little girl in the box. And the fact that someone took the time to make this beautiful photo of a beautiful little dark-skinned girl and her beautiful dark-skinned doll, I was like, I need to know more about this person, because I think that if I ever met him, he would be kind to me and he would like me. And I want to know more about this. But I was just mesmerized by this, and it stuck with me until adulthood. And then when I read an article about him sometime in the early 2000s, some retrospective that I think that a Chicago museum was doing, I was like, that's the guy, that's the photo. I have to tell this story. And then it took about 15 years for me to figure out exactly what I wanted to do, but it all worked out.
It did work out. Well, I actually wanted to ask you about that. So, as we've mentioned, this was the New Voices winner. So, was this your first manuscript that you ever wrote?
No.
I know. I have
I'm
to
trying
ask.
to think of what number it was. It might have been number 11. It might
Okay.
have been number 11 because I started writing picture books around the early 2000s, when my nephew was about 3, and I submitted them, and if people said no, I was like, oh, I guess that means I'm not a good writer. So I submitted like 6 manuscripts, got 6 rejections, and figured that career was over. And then years after that, about 12, 15 years after that, I really got back into it, and I said, okay, this is a business, and I'm going to go after this like it's a business, and I'm going to learn how the business works, and I'm going to learn how picture books are written. And I wrote many, many picture books, and I sent out many, many picture books, and I got many, many rejections. But then I also got this acceptance,
Mhm.
and um, and then I got other books that sold as well. So I kind of learned that rejection is a huge part of the process. Like, the road to success in this career is literally paved with rejection. You have to step over all the rejections to get to the acceptance. And you want that because you want your book to be published by people who care about it, who love it just as much as you do, who will fight for it. I mean, this book came out a while ago. You've had many other amazing books that you've worked on that have come out, but you guys are still like promoting and helping, and that's great. So I think that it's always worth it to wait for the publishing house that says yes.
Well, thank you. But also, I think from the takeaway from that, I think it's just your persistence and your, hard work. It was, you said it took 15 years of crafting and reworking, and that's the one thing that I'm always so like when people come up to me and they find out I'm an editor, they're like, "Oh, I have a children's manuscript," and I'm like, okay, have you been working on it? Because they think it's so easy, but it's not. It's so much work. And your text, for me, it was so wonderfully written. There's a cadence to it that I think is, um, makes sense after, talking to you that you were listening to certain kinds of music from that time period, and you took all of that energy and put into it, and it shows the hard work that goes in, that went into this book. But that it wasn't, a first draft that you just sent out. Like, you had been working on this.
Oh, I
Yeah.
worked really, although, I mean, I worked on it in a compressed period of time because I happened to be in between teaching jobs. But I went to the library every day and I pulled all of these, like the books that you have to wear the white gloves with to look at because they're, historical books and they're old and all that other stuff. And I wrote draft after draft after draft until I felt like it was streamlined, and I felt like the pictures, even though we didn't know what the pictures were going to be yet, but like the picture that I saw in my mind's eye would work with this text, and this text would work with this picture, and they would kind of work together to tell the story that I was imagining. I studied playwriting and screenwriting at NYU. So I was trained to write as a screenwriter. Like, I was trained to see like pictures and words, and that was it. Just sight and sound is what they called that class. And that's kind of how I approach picture books in general. What do I see and what do you hear when you read it? And it also really helped that there's a lot of great, James gave a lot of interviews, and when he was in his like 90s, he could tell you exactly what he was doing when he was like 7 years old, kind of. He had a great memory. And so I was super lucky to be writing about somebody where I had so much great stuff to work with.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to highlight this other photo, which is the chocolate soda wagon, which is maybe my favorite photo. And to go back to what we were talking about before, about showing, the joy of a community and positive images, that were happening. And I know you've been sharing this book with kids for the last few years. So can you just talk a little bit about what it's been like for kids of color to see this book, to see themselves in it's a biography, but it's not like a civil rights protester. It's not, but I do think these kind of images are protests in itself too, to
Well,
show.
yeah,
Yeah.
I do. I mean, I think it goes back to, it goes all the way back to the part at the beginning where he's not allowed to take the pictures because he's a Black man. And like that story could have gone in a completely different direction, right? But this is how he chose to deal with this situation. And it wasn't even like, I'm going to convince my boss that I'm the greatest person that there is. He was just like, I'm just going to do great work. I'm just going to continue to do great work. And I'm going to, and not that racism wasn't a huge part of his life in a lot of different ways. He just really chose to focus on what he could do. And what he could do is he could take an ordinary person and make them look magical because that's what he saw when he saw them. That was his superpower. That's something that actually some children at a school in Newark were just asking me, like, so what's his origin story and what's his superpower? Well,
I love that.
James's origin story is that he grew up in an integrated neighborhood, an integrated space where he was, felt connected to everybody, and he felt like he was surrounded by love. He went to a new space where there was racism and people who weren't necessarily giving him a chance. And then he just kind of expanded that feeling of love and connectedness everywhere that he went. But he stayed within Harlem, and he took everything that he had from working with the aristocrats in his hometown of Lenox, Massachusetts, and he applied that to the people in Harlem, the same kind of stylings, the same kind of artistry, all of that, because in his mind, people were people and he loved them and they all deserve to be shown in their best light as he saw them. So, and that was his superpower. Love and art was his superpower. And I think that that's a great thing for children to know how to do, because there is a lot of pain and suffering in this world, but there's also a lot of beauty, and you can be a part of that pain or you could be a part of that beauty. And you can take the pain and turn it into beauty if you want to. And that's what he did. And again, it starts with a kid who just has trouble drawing faces of the people who he loves, and every kid can relate to that, except for the kids who can't relate to it because they're really good at drawing. And
Right.
I'm like, well, okay for you, but for the rest of us, I can't make my mom's face look the way it looks when it makes my heart warm. Like
Right.
that's what I
Yeah.
get to.
But it's such an art form too. I'm one of those people that I took two photography courses in college, and I think I can make a composition, but I can't. But like, photography is such a beautiful art form, and here's someone who wasn't just documenting, but he was really staging and,
Mhm.
create, painting. Like, yes, he couldn't draw, but it was the same tools. He was using those same tools of um, composing a photo, of staging, of, shading, which happens in the dark room. So there's all these like wonderful lessons, I think, in this book for kids. But yeah, I remember seeing you do a reading of this at a library in Harlem and just seeing, and that was my first time seeing you do that, and watching their reaction and you know, their reaction to this book, which I hardly ever get to do. Like I rarely get
I
to
was
see kids
right
react to the
there.
books. Yeah.
That was such a great, and it was also a great experience because there were some kids there who I think they might have felt when they first came in they were too old for the book because it was a picture book, so they were
Hmm.
like cutting up a little bit. But then when they really got what was going on, they're like, "Oh, this is my neighborhood, and this is." I will say that being a Black author and going to Black neighborhoods, or even presenting to not even just Black kids, but children of color in general, when they first see me, partially because I am a teacher and I have a teacher demeanor and I have a teacher voice and all that other stuff, they just think I'm the librarian sharing a book with them. And
Mm.
then when I go to, and it's always this thing, and it happened there too, when I take the book and I show them the back and I show them the picture, and usually when I do visits, I'm wearing the same necklace that I wear in this picture. This thing happens where they look at the picture in the book and then they look at me and then they do this thing where they kind of look inward and say, wait a minute, if this person can do this, what can I do?
Yeah.
What can I do? And I start all of my visits with children of all ages by telling them that I decided that I wanted to write picture books when I was in second grade. And I made a promise to myself that when I grew up, I would find a way to make that happen. So then I'll ask them, what's your promise to yourself? So I might be presenting this book sometimes to, let's say, a classroom of all white children. And it's still, what's your promise to yourself for when you grow up?
Hmm.
What's it like when you tried to draw something and it didn't come out right? What was it? Has anybody ever been in a situation where everything was fine for the longest time, and now you're in the situation where people aren't looking at you as a person anymore? They're just looking at you as something, you know, they're looking at you as something else, and you have to like prove yourself as a person. And everybody can relate to that. Everybody can relate to that. And that's part of what makes, this particular story work when I go different places and I share it with different kids.
So lovely. Okay. I think we have a question. Let's see.
We do have spaces for questions. If anybody has a question.
Yes. I don't know. Can you see the question as well, or I can read it to you? Okay, so this is from Mikey, and it says, when Vivian Meyer's HBO documentary came out in 2013, I heard James Van Der Zee's name for the first time by a friend who is a professional photographer of coins. Are you aware that quite a few people found out who he was because of Meyer's documentary? Because she did a lot of street photography.
You know what? Number one, I love that question. I didn't even think about that because I did what was that was the documentary where everybody was like, Vivian Myers was my babysitter, and she took pictures of all these people. I didn't know that, but that's actually a great thing to think about, and that started to give me another idea.
Awesome.
Thank you for
Uh,
that question.
yeah. this is from Carol. She says, are you interested in writing another picture book biography?
I am writing other picture book biographies right now.
Oh, Andrea is very prolific, you guys. This is just, which just want to also mention, that just a big congratulations to you and the wonderful Rudy Gutierrez. You guys, your book, Double Bass Blues, was a Caldecott honor. So big virtual hug to you. It's so amazing.
And thank you for being like brilliant and yeah, I remember I looked at the artwork and I was just like, and I to a certain extent I do this with like the artwork for every book because I fall in love with all of that, but like I just wanted to like press the artwork like to my head so I wouldn't forget it, like Frida Kahlo or something.
Well, to you as well. The Caldecott is about art and text, and it's a beautiful book, so I'm happy for you both. Slightly jealous, but that's fine. And then one last question before we go. This is from Celia. Can you share about the revision process and the most challenging aspects? I mean, we touched a little bit about me telling you when to stop and you having the strength and the foresight to be like, no.
Yeah, I do my, and I've had some version of this with every book that I've had published so far. I try to fight for the story and not so much for, it's not me, but it's like, this is the story and this is how I see the story affecting the readers and all that other stuff. And it's worth it to try to get that to happen. Even if it's not the most linear thing, it does make a difference. As far as the revision process, the very first draft of this book came out like somewhere between a Wikipedia entry and an obituary. James Van Der Zee was born in blah, 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 and he did, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is boring. This is like what biographies were like when I was a kid, when they were like the book report thing you had to write and you were just like, oh, when is it over? And I wanted something that was light and lyrical and fun and loving. So part of what I did is I went through that whole big chunk with a highlighter and I kind of did like blackout poetry on my own book, where I selected the lines that I thought were going to be the most useful. And I also did a draft where I went through and I focused on just the images that I thought should be there. And if this image is here, I don't need all these other words to describe the image because they're going to be in the illustration. So I kind of did it back and forth like that. And then by the time the manuscript got to Jessica, Jessica has this amazing ability to take a line of text that's like this and then tweak this word and that word, and all of a sudden it's like dancing, and out of like, it's like almost like taking like a forest and like cutting it down into this beautiful bonsai tree. And it was a great process to work with her because it's like everything that I put, like she just made it better and more beautiful and more lyrical, and that was, but there was a lot of back and forth because there needs to be a lot of back and forth to get something out of your head into something that's going to be for other people. Like it's one thing to write for yourself, but it's a whole other thing to write for an entire audience of like the world. So you have to be willing to go back and forth. You have to be willing to collaborate. I mean, again, coming from theater, coming from film and television, that's all collaboration. Like you just like whatever you give somebody is like your draft, and then you like kind of hash everything else out. Being too precious about it can lead to many problems.
That is great advice, and you're too kind. Okay, so I think that wraps it up unless there's anything else you want to mention, or what are you working on now, or what's coming out soon?
Oh, the next thing I have coming out, let me see if I can get this off my clipboard over here, is in September, I'm going to be published in this book, No Voice Too Small, and it is 14 child activists in the United States. And it's a series of poems about the different child activists. The child activist that I wrote about is Nazari Ali. I was getting her name mixed up. I'm so sorry. But anyway, she's the girl who basically started the thing that became Project Orange for gun safety. And after her friend was murdered in Chicago. And the great thing about that book is that aside from the poems about each individual child activist, it also has a list of things that you, a kid, can do if you want to promote change in your community as well. So I really love that. I'm working on a middle grade novel. I am working on biographies. I am working on stories about things that I adore and make me happy, and I hope make other people happy. And yeah, there's a lot to work on. And then aside from all of that, I'm trying to do what I can to promote Black voices in children's literature and adult literature. Because again, I think a lot of people who don't know a lot of Black people think there's like one story about us and one way of life for us, and it's all about the struggle and it's all about this. And there is struggle and there is trauma and there is pain that is going on right now. But there is so much joy and so much beauty and so much wonder and so much to look forward to in the future that I want to make sure that people get to see that too, because if not, they're really missing out.
What a beautiful way to end this. Thank you for chatting with me today. It was good to see you. Yeah. Okay.
I miss you terribly.
Oh, I miss you too. Okay, just a quick announcement. So thanks everyone for joining us for this Tea Time Talk. And please join us for our next one, which will be next Tuesday at noon. And it will be author Kyle Lukoff and our editorial director, Cheryl Klein, discussing their wonderful award-winning book, When Aiden Became a Brother. So again, that's next Tuesday. Oh, all right. It's good to see you. Bye, Andrea. Andrea. Oh.
I can be Andrea for you.
No, never, never. Okay.
Good. Hometown name. It's all good.
Okay.
Bye.